Welcome back to the Center in the City podcast. I'm your host, Wade Brill, and I am so glad you are here. Today's episode, I get to interview Kathy Oneto, who is a dear friend of mine. She's been on the podcast a few times. We've done some joint episodes together, but really excited because today she is joining us to talk about her new book, Sustainable Ambition: How to Prioritize What Matters to Thrive in Life and Work. Kathy's new book is out in the world, so you can check it out in the show notes to order it, grab a copy. One of the things I love about this book, and I talk about this in our podcast interview, is just how many frameworks Kathy gives and how many insightful questions and prompts to get clear on how to prioritize the things that matter most to you, because we have such conflicting interests, especially most of you listeners are driven, ambitious humans. You know that you want to be doing a lot in your personal and professional life. And so using these tools in Kathy's framework can really help you get clarity on where do you get to put your energy and focus right now. So for those that don't know a little bit about Kathy, I'll share a little bit about her bio. You can see the rest of it linked in the show notes. But Kathy is an executive and life work coach. She's a speaker, facilitator, and on a mission to help ambitious organizations, teams, and individuals explore how to live and work differently for more success, satisfaction, and sustainability. Kathy is also the host of the Sustainable Ambition podcast, which is awesome. So again, definitely check it out. I'm going to leave this episode with so many insights about where you are in your current life, what you're wanting to prioritize, and some insightful prompts to think about what gets to be next. So wherever you're listening to this podcast episode, I welcome you to settle in and let's get centered. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to let you know that there is about a week left to register for the Summer of Self-Care group coaching program. If you are craving a space to come back to yourself, a space where you can start to feel and hear and understand yourself on a deeper and more holistic level so that you can take those insights, those awareness, and bring them into your life, this program is for you. It's really about prioritizing yourself. It's about saying yes to yourself. And in order to say yes to yourself, we have to know ourselves. To make this the best summer yet by investing in you. You are the common denominator in your relationships, in your career, in your health. So prioritizing yourself is not selfish, it's smart. Learn more in the show notes and grab the discount code that is available for just a few more days. If you have questions, feel free to reach out, linked in the show notes, how to contact me. And now enjoy this episode of the podcast. Kathy, welcome back to the Center in the City podcast.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be having this conversation with you, Wade.
I think you've been on my podcast the most, the most times, the guest with the most visits, which is such an honor, and especially to have you as your book baby is coming out, Sustainable Ambition. So I can't wait to chat with you about it today.
Yes, I'm excited for that too. I didn't realize that either, Wade, when you think about it because of our shared partner episodes. You're right. I'm like, wait, this is only my second time on. But no, that's not the case.
Yeah, we did our PACE part 1 and part 2 conversation. So I will link those all in the show notes so people can get even more background information into your work and the topics we've explored, because they're very much connected. Sustainable ambition and how do we practice staying centered in this world? And I'd love to hear, how are you practicing staying centered as you launch a book? Because I'm in my own little process with that right now. And let me tell you, it is calling on me to really engage all of my resources.
Well, I'm right there with you. I am about to do a social post that says that honestly, I am not in balance right now at all. And that's why I don't like that term. This is an intense time. I'm doing work and I'm also launching a book, and it's asking a lot of me. And so part of what I'm leaning into is that component of getting really fiercely focused and just accepting that for right now, this is what requires my attention. And then being really thoughtful about what other elements of my life are really important and that I have capacity, honestly, to put attention toward right now. And then there are many things that I am putting on the back burner or where I'm allowing myself to be bad at, and I know you don't always love that expression that I use bad at, but it's just like my house is a mess. I'm not eating the best. I'm eating pretty well because I generally eat well, but just to say, I am not always requiring that I make a really thoughtful meal every single night, as an example. And so I think during these times of intensity, it does require a lot of intentionality. And I will just say, another thing that I really lean into during these periods is pacing myself and investing in the breaks that I need, so that I can sustain this period. And then I'm also planning for when do I get a significant break at the end of this intense time period so that I can make sure that I don't burn out.
Such a big point there that I want to circle back to. And just so listeners can gain a sense, give us the kind of few sentence definition of what sustainable ambition really is and what it means.
Yeah, and I'll speak to this in the context of the book because I think that sustainable ambition from a holistic kind of definition for me in terms of my body of work actually is goes beyond it. So, around the book, I would say that sustainable ambition is really about how do we pursue our goals and dreams in a way that is fulfilling and manageable over time without us having to sacrifice our lives or our well-being in the process. And so that's how I think about sustainable ambition. And there's other definitions around it, but the other component of it is I like to say, don't shoot for work life balance because I think that's an elusive goal and sets unrealistic expectations that leaves us all very frustrated. And instead, work toward life work sustainability. And you can find that sustainability at the alignment between the right ambitions at the right time with the right effort.
I love what you shared in the beginning of that definition, like over a period of time, I believe is the language you use. And I think it's so important for us to like let that sink in. And I notice even just in my body hearing that, I was like, oh, because I know for myself, I know a lot of listeners, I know my clients, like having that internal drive that we need the results now, we need that life structure now, we need that ambition benefit now. Like we can typically be impatient, and I'll speak for myself. I know I can be impatient, and reminding myself that it happens over time. Like even just my book that's coming out, I wrote it over 10 years ago, and I went through my own internal, battle with editing it and fixing it and publishing, and all that stuff. And I'll save that conversation for another podcast episode. But to remind myself that things can happen over time, that it doesn't have to just happen within the quarter or the month or in the year, but we can create some more space around it. And that feels just like that feels sustainable in itself.
For sure. I like to say that ambitions aren't time bound. And yet, what's really interesting as I was listening to you reflect on that is I do talk about in the book, and, in particular with one of the people that I interviewed, this idea that, patience is required. And oftentimes I think what goes along with that is that we often underestimate the amount of time that ambitions and goals take. And, like you with your book, I started this book over 2.5 years ago. I thought it was supposed to come out in September. It's coming out in June. There's a number of reasons why that's the case, even partly because, they gave me a schedule and were like, don't you want to get this out sooner? And I said, I can't. No, I mean, yes, but I can't do the editing on that pace that you are setting in there. It's not going to be spacious enough for me. And so But the other piece that I was hitting me as you were saying that, Wade, was at the same time that we might be called to have patience, the other side of it is we are motivated by making progress. And what was popped into my head was the idea that oftentimes we forget, and I say this because I need to be reminded myself that we we don't often go for that large big ambition or goal right out of the gate. And I talk about this idea of bringing your ambitions closer in, or which is just like, how do you make it smaller in the sense of what actually, where can I make progress right now? So even as we might have to accept that we need patience and that that bigger thing that we want might take time, how do we get that reward of, but I am working toward it, by recognizing that our goals and ambitions do grow up over time and we need to start someplace with that small first step before, just as part of the overall journey.
I love that reminder because it doesn't mean like think small and don't be ambitious, but it's inviting us to think about, okay, if that is the bigger ambitious goal, what is just one tiny step or smaller bite size you can take right now that is still has that ambitious juice in it that is moving you forward. And I think that's really helpful for the mind, and because like our mind expects like, oh, we're going to achieve that quickly, or we're going to get to that plateau, or we're going to, and to bring us back, and it helps build confidence that we can take that tiny step forward, and that confidence and that self-trust is then more motivating to keep going.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to talk about in chapter 5. First of all, I really love this book because not only do you clearly articulate the framework of what sustainable ambition entails, but you also offer different exercises that are really thought-provoking and challenging for people to think about, challenging in a good way, for you to sit down and get introspective to gain some insight. And in chapter 5, you talk about navigating the ups and downs of ambition. And I think this is really helpful, especially for probably a lot of listeners, because, I think we think ambition has to be purely career driven. And I think a lot, I'm thinking back as just a woman being conditioned in a culture where, all of these women before me have been able to carve the way, my mom included, to carve the way for us, for women to vote, for us to be working, for us to be out of the house, for us to have choice, for us to have more voice. And so I think there's this extra pressure that we need to be specifically ambitious within our careers. And I'm curious, like, how can one think about their careers, their ambition in their careers in a more sustainable way? Because I think there's also this pressure of, I need to get to a certain place in my career, specifically if you're in corporate, before I have kids. Or at this age, I should be, in this kind of role or making this kind of money. And I'm just curious, like, how can we navigate that in a more sustainable way? Because there's so much pressure and expectation that gets put on people that really leads to burnout.
Yeah, it's so challenging, these societal pressures that are, you know, that we wrestle with, right? They are, I was going to say put on us, and yet it's like, it's not as if anybody is like doing it to us, but it surrounds us, right? And we're swimming in it. And so, I'm going to start with the first place, which is just to acknowledge this idea that ambition, from my point of view, is not just for work and not just for our professional lives, but is, from my perspective, and part of what makes it sustainable is embracing it as being anything that you want to shape for your life, including your work. And I think by looking at it more holistically, that is one way to loosen this grip around work being so central to our lives and our identities. And so, and what's interesting about it is when we start to look at it more holistically, in talking with other people about it, what happens is you actually start to become even that much more ambitious. It's like, ooh, I want to be ambitious about this and that and this other thing. And, I recently interviewed somebody on my podcast whose episode is going to come out soon. And he did this for himself in his early 50s. And in doing so, it actually led to him becoming that much more successful. Like, so by broadening his lens around how he was defining ambition for himself, uh, those other things that he was doing outside actually motivated him more and energized him even more. And I'm not saying that he uh, worked more. It's just he, even around his work, he redefined what it meant to him to succeed there. And so part of it, I think, is, again, broadening that definition to kind of loosen work's grip. Um, and then there are these persistent narratives, unfortunately, out there that are around like achieve a lot, achieve quickly. And, they're not easy to push against. And yet I think that is what it requires. It requires courage, and it also requires knowing oneself. And around along those lines, just a couple of thoughts. One, you know, many of us, especially if we are motivated by achievement, not everybody values achievement, but for those of us who do, like I know I do, I think one place to look is to start to shift the lens away from external rewards towards what satisfies me, even as you are kind of, okay, you might want some of those external achievements and that acknowledgement, but I think shifting a little bit towards satisfying yourself and finding some peace in that and starting to learn what does satisfy you can be another way to unlock that. The other thing, and then I'll pause, Wade, is just, we're pressured to kind of do it all. And yet, I might challenge people to really say, like, where might I actually be able to subtract? Because I think what I'm inviting here is an area that we all struggle with is how do we all actually allow ourselves to dial down, our effort and how much we're doing. And so that's why, when I say be bad at something, part of it is dial down that effort. Don't, allow yourself to not have to be perfect all the time. It's okay.
Drop the expectation that you need to be succeeding in all areas of your life. And I know it's hard for people. It's really hard for a lot of people. I love what you said around inviting this idea of ambition to be bigger than what your career. And I think that's really helpful for even me. And I can think of a few friends, few clients who are in the stage of life when you're thinking about motherhood and that idea. I was like, fuck, like, how am I going to like grow my business and be a mother, raise a child, give birth to a child, like do all these things? Like, how do you do it? And I know a lot of women struggle with the balance, and you can't do it alone. There's that essence of you need help, whether that's family help or paid help, to think and to have permission that I can be ambitious as a mom. And that's okay, that it doesn't have to be LinkedIn quote unquote worthy, that like it still counts. I think is really important for us to hear. And I think it takes some of that expectation and pressure that you were mentioning off so that we can fully be present with what we're doing. Because it's a hard task to be a parent, to raise kids. And so to like recognize like that is a place that also can be in our culture should be more valued around being ambitious.
It might be the most ambitious goal of all, frankly, to raise another human, right? And people talk about like, what do they hope for their kids, and raising somebody who's kind and, it sets them up such that they can lead a good life on their own. Yeah, that's an ambitious act for sure.
What if you're like, I want to be ambitious in all areas of my life right now? Like, how do you practice dialing it down or selecting this is where I'm going to put some of my attention and focus in right now, knowing like these other aspects are still important to me, but maybe that's not where my full ambition is going to be right now?
Yeah, I'll mention a couple of areas. The one thing I want to start with actually before I get to kind of making choices, if you will, that's one area or lens that people can look at. I'm going to share a couple of other strategies. One thing just to say that I don't want to be somebody who is judgmental, that I want sustainable ambition to be a no judgment zone. And tells people like, hey, you can't dream big. Like, who am I to say you can't dream big and go after everything, right? Some people I listen to where they push back on this idea you can't do it all. um I think doing it all is challenging, and yet what I would say is if you have a lot that you want to go and pursue, what I encourage is just make sure you have structures and systems in place so that you can sustain yourself through it. That's what's important to me. And so you just need to balance those things out. But in terms of actually choosing, so a couple of the things that I share in the book, one is this idea of having a horizon map. And horizon map can be used on longer horizons, like let's map out the next 10 to 20 years of my life and not, hold it lightly because if things are going to change, but to kind of really get clear on what really requires my attention right now? What am I really drawn towards now? What can I put off on the horizon such that I don't feel this pressure to try to do it all, right? That's one simple act of just going through an exercise to understand what's really is drawing my energy and attention now, and what requires kind of some level of urgency such that I should be pursuing it now. So that's one exercise that I have. And then I'll just talk about more without going into the kind of 2 by 2 grids that I have and things like that. Is just this idea of one, coordinating our goals and our ambitions a little bit better. So one way to reduce tension or friction is even just to see, like, do my goals, and this is a part of motivation theory, do my goals actually go well together? Are they coordinated? Is there a way for me to better coordinate them such that I'm not experiencing this friction? Because one of the ways that time friction starts to exist is when where we're spending our time is not where we wish we were spending our time. And you can just go through the simple thought experiment. I almost experience this too regularly, even though I know this and I try to practice with it, which is like, oh, I'm working on this, but I'd really rather be working on this. And it causes so much consternation. And so the more we can kind of get things coordinated in our life such that there isn't this friction, even coming to terms with or peace with, hey, I'm putting some of these things off on the horizon, I think can help. The other couple of strategies that I talk about just in a broad sense are sometimes we do have to choose, right? It becomes as simple as that. We just can't do it all. And like, can we courageously choose and actually determine, like, yes, I am going to put that on the back burner for now and be okay with that. Sometimes within those choices, I also, because I try to make sure, like, well, are you going to be happy with that? Well, is there a way to nurture an ambition just in a small way so it's still feeding you to some degree? The final way that I want to share is how can you compromise around an ambition? And what that might look like is, can you reinterpret an ambition or goal to make it fit better into your life at this stage? Might be another way of looking at things. So to give you a simple, maybe not the best example, but just an example of this for me, because this is actually like a big ambition that I've had my entire life, which is I've always wanted to live abroad. And I've just not been able to make it happen. And I
Yes.
still, yes, exactly. And with my parents at their current age, I'm like, I don't know that I like, really, I'd love to make this happen in the next, I'd rather it happen sooner rather than later. But just given my life stage, given the age of my parents, given what's, like being abroad just doesn't really make sense. So now I'm like, how do I reinterpret that goal so I can actually experience some of what I'm longing for around it? Because what I actually wanted from that goal when I was in college or as a young adult, it's actually probably different now at my current stage of life. And so, how do I actually relook at that ambition and reinterpret it in a way, like I said, so that I can may be able to actually pull it closer in and have some elements of it, is something that I'm playing with. And so I invite people to look at that as a way of kind of thinking about pacing ambitions and kind of navigating this. How do you make choices and what have you?
Wow, you just shared so many beautiful ways that we can think about how to choose and be in relationship to our ambitions. And, even within your framework of like right time, right effort, right ambition, thinking about the time can be really helpful because to your point, like right now might not be the time because of family constraints or financial constraints or your job constraints, or there might be something or health constraints that are preventing you from being able to make that ambition your primary focus. And so I love the balance of right time, and there, is never necessarily a perfect right time to do something, but there's sometimes that there's that good enough, right? There's that like this there's space for this. And I think that can be really helpful for people's anxieties and that sense of urgency and that sense of desire. And when you organize it in your framework and even have things on the horizon map, it also captures like what's important and what's important at least right now, so people can pace themselves and realize, okay, I've got it down. By me acknowledging it to myself is an aspect of me honoring this is important. And again, maybe it's not the primary focus right now, but it's meaningful, and I can circle back to this when I do have the capacity or when it does get to be a primary. And so I think one of the reasons I'm so excited to share your book with the world is because I think this helps us be more centered in our bodies and our choices, in how we are able to manage our energy, manage our attention. Because again, we tend to be in this like extreme culture of like all or nothing, when it's like that is not sustainable.
For sure. And as I was listening to you, what came to mind for me are a couple of the words that I really, use as an anchor for myself in terms of what I hope for people through my work, which is, the first is joy, but really what was resonating with me and listening to you is what I really hope through going through some of these exercises is that people can find some peace and some ease. And I think that's what you're talking about in terms of getting centered, right? And I think part of that centering too is being in alignment with yourself. And that's where sustainable ambition is anchored. It's like it won't be sustainable unless it's aligned to you. And that's really what I mean by the term right. Right for you is what's really critical. And so being centered to yourself, I think, allows you to be centered as you walk through life.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this before, and we're going to talk about this more when we celebrate your book launch. Without just thinking about the structure in which we're taking action, there's also that inside game of, how do we meet ourselves with the ups and downs of our ambitions and the ups and downs of the conditions of life. And a lot of that work is also internal. How do we talk to ourselves when things are working well and when things are not working well? How do we be our best friend instead of our worst enemy? How do we get to have realistic expectations of ourselves versus so it's so important of matching both the inner and the outer work to help move us forward and be as quote unquote centered as we can be.
Yes, I so appreciate your bringing this up because, you'll probably laugh at me, Wade. I'm sure we've talked about this before, but as I was doing more and more work and for the book, it just and became that much more clear. It's not as if it wasn't clear to me, but it really struck me as I was doing work for the book, just how emotional of a journey navigating our ambitions over a lifetime is. And it's why there are certain chapters in my book, and it will only scratch the surface. And I'm not a psychotherapist, and I'm not a mindfulness coach like you know. And one of the things that I say about sustainable ambition is that it is aspirational, and also that it is a practice. And it's not, this is why I, again, don't like the term work life balance, because it makes it thing like, oh, I'm just going to find that balance and then I'm going to have it and I'm all set. And then when everything goes off, because yeah, the next moment it's going to be out of whack, it can throw us off. And the reality is, living in a sustainable way, I think requires constant attunement and constant attention, I should say. And what struck me as you were talking to Wade was, just for you and I in this conversation to be honest with everybody listening, that just because you and I do this work and talk about these practices does not mean that we are above it all. That like we are walking right alongside you in terms of our own self management around these practices. It is a daily practice to manage ourselves around these ups and downs that come our way.
120 million%. And, it's helpful for our brains. That's why, again, I'm really excited for people to get their hands on your book, because there's so many tangible tools that the mind can sink into, that gives us some scaffolding, that gives them some structure as we navigate these floaty concepts, and as we define what they mean to us, and help give us some guardrails as we are living life. And, I think one of the gifts of coaching is that it helps you really foster your own navigation tools. You get to connect to your intuition, you get to connect to your values, you get to connect to your vision. And from there, you get to step in. And so I really think that, like, having your sustainable ambition framework is going to be such a gift for everybody. So I can't wait for them to get their hands on it.
Oh, thank you so much. I also appreciate you calling this out, because I think that the book is written in a way for a reason, which is, and I hope that for some people, the overall concepts I think will be sufficient, right? They'll want just those high level, certain themes or mindset shifts will help them a great deal. And yet I purposely wrote the book to have tools in them and exercises in them, because I get frustrated when there are books that only have concepts and don't give me a way to actually work with it. And some people will like those tools a lot and engage with them. And some will work for some and some won't work for others. Some are in there because some people like that type of a tool, and others it might not work. So my hope is that there's a range of them in there that really does make it accessible for people to work with it in the way that suits them.
Well, thank you, Kathy, for being here and sharing your wisdom with us. Where can listeners get their hands on your book?
Yes. Well, they can go to my website, sustainableambition.com. There's a specific page, sustainableambition.com/books, and there are links there and information for folks. And if you listen to this and pre-order before June 10th, when it releases, there are some pre-order bonuses for you there as well.
Yeah. And I'll link all those in the show notes for easy access. Thank you, Kathy, so much.
Thanks for having me, Wade. Always lovely to be in conversation with you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Centered in the City podcast. Kathy and I would love to hear from you. What are your biggest takeaways from this episode? What ambitions does your heart want to be following right now? What ambitions feel like they're in conflict with one another? Share with us your takeaways on LinkedIn or join us on Instagram. As always, thank you for letting this podcast enter your ears, your heart, your mind. And until next time, stay centered.